For my presentation today, I decided to cover a subject I've always found fascinating: legends about the terrifying monsters of the ocean depths. Humans have always been both fascinated and fearful about what creatures lie beneath the endless reserves of saltwater that cover 75% of the Earth's surface. And the human imagination, always ever inventive, has conjured up stories regarding these creatures. Or are they even stories? In today's presentation, I'll be examining perhaps the most infamous sea monster of them all, the Kraken, sold into your oars. It's going to be a treacherous voyage. Starting out, krakens have their origin in 12th century Norway, where they were described to be so big as they were mistaken as groups of animals. Interestingly enough, it was Carolus Linnaeus, the biologist who is renowned for creating the Linnaean order of classification, who first coined the term kraken in his famous work Systema Naturae. Later on in the 18th century, Eric Pontoppidan gives us a detailed description of the kraken in his Natural History of Norway. He describes it as round, flat, and full of arms or branches, and the largest and most surprising of all the animal creation. Pontoppidan goes on to describe the beast's colossal tentacles, writing that fishes are seen continuously leaping about till they roll off into the water from the sides of it. At last, several bright points or horns appear, which grow thicker and thicker, and higher they rise above the surface of the water, and sometimes they stand up as high and as large as the masts of middle-sized vessels. A final noteworthy detail of Pontoppidan's account of the kraken is that the creature has an interesting mechanism for attracting prey. Pontoppidan writes that the great beast produces an evacuation, which is very agreeable to the smell of taste of other fishes, and makes the water appear quite thick and turbid. The smell causes fish from all around to gather near the kraken's maw, where they are promptly devoured. Pontoppidan wasn't actually too far off the mark in his account of the kraken. What he most likely was describing was a giant squid, but he did get a few details off. What he thought was a kraken, and this is a picture of a giant squid here. What he thought what he thought was a kraken poop was actually squid ink, and his description of the colossal tentacles was probably heavily biased by the fact that the medieval sailors who told him this information were probably exaggerating the story in the same vein that all other medieval storytellers exaggerated their stories. Following Pontoppidan's account, sightings of krakens continued into the early 19th century, although they became increasingly less exaggerated and more grounded in reality. So, one of the scientists, his name is Pierre Denis de Montefort. He talked about how the creature encountered by it was called the Kraken octopus, and he did describe, however, that the Kraken, there was a Kraken octopus, colossal octopus that was bigger than the Kraken octopus, but he grounded the Kraken octopus more in reality. He described how it was smaller. He described it how it was not, its tentacles weren't, as large as, the mass of great vessels, and he more described it as being 12 to 14 meters in length, which is more in tune to the giant squid. So as you see it go along, you also saw how increased scientific research made it so that we got closer to the truth as we went along. But they still, so even as they've faded more into reality, we do now generally know that they were probably describing giant squids. They still have a lot of relevance in popular culture. First you have the infamous line or Lisa Kraken from the Clash of the Titans, that movie, which has entered the pop culture lexicon at this point. And many fantasy games such as Magic the Gathering, such as D&D, many different fantasy settings feature krakens prominently, in their design, in their gameplay. They're kind of a fantasy staple now. And also, you also can see it, even the Kraken's presence in simple things such as sports teams like the Seattle Kraken hockey team. But one of the most important things I wanted to touch on in this presentation that krakens have importance to us as the human race. Even with our insane advances in technology, humans still know very little about what creatures inhabit our oceans. According to in NOAA, 91% of ocean life has yet to be discovered, and 80% of the ocean is unmapped. And although Pontoppidan's account was most likely an exaggerated account of a giant squid from two superstitious Norse sailors, we're discovering real-life krakens of our own, creatures both monstrous and magical in appearance, such as the colossal squid, which is much heavier than the giant squid, clocking it at 1,100 pounds, and the mysterious big fin squid, which looks like it was ripped straight from a horror movie. With such discoveries being relatively recent and an entire ocean still brimming with creatures to discover, monster legends such as that of the Kraken bear special importance to our adventure-hungry species. Such legends tell of massive, fearsome, and elusive beasts lying in wait for the questing sailor to discover them, and we still eagerly search the oceans in search of these legendary creatures, such as when in 2016, The Google Earth image circulated around that was it was just like a rock. It was a simple rock, but people blew it so much out of proportion, and they talked about how this simple rock was they thought it was a squid. They thought it was a kraken. People went crazy. They were like it went all over the internet. But then yeah, like people like researchers came out and they were like, yeah, it's a rock. But that hasn't deterred us as a species. These legends of sea monsters will ensure that our species will continue to explore the oceans in search of the next big discovery because perhaps we may yet find bigger and bigger creatures.